The sun rose red and weary over the rolling fields of dry cornstalks, casting long shadows across the worn-out farmhouse that had seen better years. Inside, the air smelled faintly of flour, earth, and wood smoke. Mary Ellen woke before dawn, as she did every morning when the rooster's crow was still tangled in the mist. Her palms were already calloused from years of milking cows, kneading dough, and hauling water from the well. But she didn't complain. Hard work was her inheritance. Hope was her luxury. Her father, Thomas, lay in the next room, coughing softly, a sound that had become too familiar since the last winter's fever. Once a strong farmer with a laugh that could shake the rafters, he now moved with the weariness of a man who had wrestled too long with bad seasons and lost harvests. Their farm had shrunk over the years, one acre sold after another to pay debts. Only the apple orchard remained, thin, stubborn trees that refused to stop bearing fruit no matter how poor the soil or cruel the weather. Mary Ellen loved those trees. As a little girl, her mother had taught her to bake apple pies from their fruit, whispering that a good pie isn't about sugar or spice, it is about heart. When her mother passed, the recipe became a sacred memory, a way to keep her love alive. Every time Mary Ellen rolled the dough, she felt her mother's ghostly hands guiding hers, folding tenderness into every crust. This morning, the air was thick with the scent of apples she had picked the night before. She washed them carefully, humming a tune her mother once sang while she baked. Her bare feet brushed the cold kitchen floor as she worked the dough, dusting her arms with flour like pale snow. A sliver of sunlight crept across her cheek, lighting up the small, determined smile that so rarely reached her lips. When the pie slid into the wood-burning oven, the smell filled the small farmhouse, sweet, warm, comforting. Her father stirred in bed and called her name softly. "Smells like heaven, Mary girl," he rasped. She brought him a slice with a chipped plate and a tin fork. He smiled weakly after his first bite. "You bake like your mama." She sat by his side, watching him eat. "Pa," she whispered, "you think maybe one day things will get better?" He looked out the window at the withered fields. "They have to, sweetheart. Trouble doesn't last forever, but good hearts do." Outside, the sound of hooves echoed faintly from the dusty road that ran past their farm. Mary Ellen stood and peeked through the curtain. Riders. Likely ranch hands from the Hart estate, she thought. The Hart Ranch was the largest in the county, owned by Samuel Hart, a man both admired and feared. He was known for his fortune, his iron will, and the loneliness that hung around him like a shadow. People said he hadn't smiled in years. Mary Ellen had never met him, but she knew the ranch's rent collectors came by every few months, and they were due again soon. Her father didn't have the money. The thought of losing their last few acres made her chest ache, but she pushed it down. Worry wouldn't bake bread or heal the sick. She took the pie from the oven, golden and bubbling, and set it on the windowsill to cool. The scent drifted into the morning air, curling like a prayer. As the riders passed on the road below, one of them slowed his horse and turned his head toward the farmhouse. For just a moment, Mary Ellen thought she saw a man with piercing gray eyes glance her way. Then the hoofbeats faded, and the dust settled again. But something in the air felt different. She didn't know it yet, but that morning, that pie, would be the beginning of everything. The Hart Ranch stretched farther than the eye could see, rolling pastures dotted with cattle, fences that gleamed silver in the sun, and barns built strong as fortresses. From the white-railed porch of the main house, Samuel Hart could see it all. Every acre, every head of livestock, every man who worked under his command, they were his responsibility. And yet, despite all he owned, his heart felt as empty as the wide plains at winter's end. Samuel stood in his tailored vest and dusty boots, sipping black coffee as dawn burned across the horizon. The sun painted the sky in strokes of amber and rose, but he barely noticed. Beauty had lost its power over him long ago. Since his wife's death 5 years earlier, he had buried himself in work, driving men and horses alike harder than ever. The ranch ran like clockwork, but his soul ran on silence. He was a man respected, even feared, in town. When he rode through the marketplace, people lowered their voices. Women whispered about his broad shoulders, his sharp grey eyes, and his wealth, but none dared to speak to him for long. He was a man no one truly knew, wrapped in duty and sorrow. In the kitchen, his housekeeper, Mrs. Yates, bustled about preparing breakfast. "Sir," she said hesitantly, setting down his plate, "they're saying the mayor's announced the harvest festival next week." He nodded absently, cutting into his eggs. "They say there'll be a baking contest again this year." Samuel looked up briefly. "And why should that matter to me?" Mrs. Yates smiled faintly. "Because you're one of the judges again. The town still trusts your taste for quality." He gave a dry laugh, a rare sound. "Quality, yes. Sweetness, no." She chuckled, then added softly, "There's talk of a girl from the old Miller farm. They say her apple pies are the best in 3 counties. Samuel didn't respond. Gossip about farm girls and their pies hardly concerned a man with cattle contracts and drought losses on his mind. Still, as he finished his meal and stepped outside, the words lingered somewhere in the back of his thoughts. A girl from the old Miller farm. Later that morning, Samuel rode out to inspect the southern fields with his foreman, Cole Danner. The ranch hands scattered when they saw him coming, not out of fear, but out of habit. He expected perfection, and no one wanted to disappoint the boss. They rode in silence for a while, until Cole spoke. "The town's buzzing about that baking contest, sir. Gonna be the biggest one yet. Heard some fella's daughter is entering to try and win the job at your kitchen." Samuel raised an eyebrow. "Is that so?" "Yeah, poor girl. Works that dying orchard near the creek. Folks say her pies could make a preacher forget his sermon." Samuel snorted softly. "I'll believe that when I taste it." By afternoon, the sun blazed high, and dust clung to his clothes. They stopped at the edge of the property near the old county road, the same road that ran past a sagging little farmhouse surrounded by apple trees. Smoke curled lazily from its chimney, and in the window, something golden sat cooling on the sill, an apple pie. Samuel's gaze lingered. Even from a distance, the scene stirred something faint, a memory of simpler days, of laughter in a kitchen filled with cinnamon and sunlight. His late wife, Clara, used to bake the same way, humming while she worked. For the first time in years, he felt a tug at the heart he thought had hardened to stone. He turned his horse away sharply. "Let's move on," he said to Cole, his voice tight. But as they rode back toward the main house, the image stayed with him. The poor farmhouse, the girl's shadow behind the curtain, and that perfect pie gleaming in the sun. That night, as the wind swept over the ranch and the crickets began their song, Samuel stood by his window, staring down at the lights of the town below. Somewhere out there, he thought, someone was baking a pie that smelled like hope. He didn't know her name yet, but soon he would. The town square of Willow Creek hadn't seen this much excitement in years. Banners fluttered from the lampposts, children darted between horse carts, and the smell of roasted corn drifted from the market stalls. The mayor stood on a wooden stage, his hat shining from too much polish, and bellowed through a brass horn, "The annual harvest festival will be held 1 week from today. Prizes, games, and contests for all." The crowd cheered, but it was the next words that set hearts racing. "And this year, the baking contest winner shall earn $50 and a position at the Hart Ranch kitchen." A wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd. The Hart Ranch kitchen, the richest estate for miles, known for its grand tables and polished silver. A single year's wage could change someone's life. Mary Ellen stood at the edge of the crowd, clutching a basket of eggs she hoped to sell. Her heart fluttered at the announcement. She had never dreamed of working at a place like the Hart Ranch, but $50 could pay off her father's medical bills and keep their farm another season. When the crowd dispersed, she hurried home along the dusty path, her shoes thin as paper. She burst through the door, eyes bright, Pa, did you hear? The festival's coming, and the winner gets a job at the Hart Ranch. Thomas Miller sat in his worn chair by the window, the old patchwork quilt over his knees. He smiled faintly at her excitement. A job at the ranch, huh? That's no small thing, Mary girl. But what would a ranch want with a pie from us? Mary Ellen hesitated. Maybe they'd want one baked with heart. Ma always said love's what makes it good. He coughed, reaching for her hand. Then you've already got the secret ingredient. That night, after supper, Mary Ellen sat by the fire with her mother's old cookbook, the one with flour-dusted pages and a faded ribbon marking the apple pie recipe. The handwriting, looping and delicate, was her mother's. The smell of old paper and cinnamon filled her with both longing and courage. She traced the words with her finger. Bake it slow, with care. Don't rush the crust. Good things need time. The next morning she started her preparations. She traded 3 eggs and a jar of honey for a small bag of sugar from the grocer. She bartered milk for flour. She even walked miles to the orchard beyond town to gather the ripest apples, golden and crisp under the autumn sun. Her father watched from the porch, his smile weary but proud. "You're your mother's daughter," he said softly. The days passed quickly. Every evening she practiced, rolling dough until her arms ached, tasting different blends of spice, always whispering to herself, "This one will win." By Friday night, the kitchen smelled like heaven itself. Her final pie sat on the counter, perfect and gleaming under lamplight. The crust was golden, the filling thick and fragrant with cinnamon, nutmeg, and a hint of clove. She wrapped it in clean linen, praying the flavor would hold till morning. Outside, the stars shone bright above the apple trees. Her father's weak voice floated from his room. "Mary," he called, "whatever happens tomorrow, I'm already proud of you." She swallowed the lump in her throat and whispered, "I'll win for you, Pa. I'll win for us." In the stillness of that night, Mary Ellen didn't just dream of victory. She dreamed of freedom, of a life where her hands weren't cracked from labor, where the roof didn't leak, where she could bake not for survival, but for joy. She didn't know that fate, and a certain rancher, were already moving toward her, step by step. Tomorrow, their worlds would finally meet. The morning of the Harvest Festival dawned bright and golden, the kind of day that made even the poorest folks stand a little taller. Mary Ellen rose before the sun, washed her face in cool well water, and braided her chestnut hair with trembling fingers. She wrapped her pie in clean white cloth and placed it carefully in a wicker basket lined with wildflowers. Her heart beat fast, not from fear but from hope. "Go on, Mary girl," her father said, handing her a single silver button, all he had left from her mother's wedding dress. "Keep this with you, for luck." She kissed his cheek, tucked the button into her pocket, and started down the long dirt road toward town. The basket swung from her arm, the morning wind carrying the sweet smell of baked apples behind her. The festival had already begun by the time she arrived. Tents lined the streets, children laughed, and the church bell rang over the hum of voices. Bakers arranged their pies on long tables covered in white linen, blueberry, cherry, pumpkin, pecan, each one more beautiful than the last. Mary Ellen felt small among the polished silver plates and fancy pastries dusted with sugar. Her own pie sat humbly in its simple tin, its golden crust gleaming in the sunlight. She found a quiet corner to wait for her turn, brushing invisible crumbs from her plain cotton dress. As she glanced around, her eyes caught movement near the stables, a tall man dismounting from a chestnut horse, his posture proud, his dark vest gleaming against the sunlight. The crowd parted as if by instinct. Samuel Hart. Even from a distance he seemed larger than life, all hard lines and quiet authority. Mary Ellen had seen him once before, riding the road near her farm. She hadn't known his name then, but she remembered the way his gray eyes seemed to look through her. As he strode through the crowd, people greeted him with respect tinged with caution. He nodded politely, but his face remained unreadable, He was there to judge the contest, and everyone knew his standards were exacting. Some said he could taste a lie in a crust. Mary Ellen tried not to stare, but when he turned toward her row of pies, her breath caught. Her fingers clutched the edge of her basket so tightly that her knuckles whitened. At that moment, a boy running through the crowd bumped into her from behind. She gasped, stumbling forward, the pie slipping from her hands. Before it could hit the ground, a strong hand caught it mid-air. Mary Ellen froze. Samuel Hart stood before her, holding the pie as if it were made of glass. His gloved fingers brushed hers lightly as he returned it, his gaze steady, curious. Up close, his face was striking, weathered from sun and work, but his eyes held an unexpected depth, like storm clouds holding back rain. "Careful," he said quietly. "You could have lost it." Mary Ellen's cheeks flushed. "Thank you, sir. I didn't mean—" He tilted his head slightly, studying her. "You're one of the contestants?" "Yes, sir. Just a simple pie." His mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but not far from one either. Simple things are often the hardest to get right. She nodded, not knowing what to say. For a heartbeat, the noise of the crowd seemed to fade. It was only the two of them. The rancher with the guarded eyes and the farm girl clutching her hope in a pie tin. Then he turned, his expression unreadable once again. "Good luck, miss." As he walked away, she exhaled shakily. The warmth of his brief touch lingered in her hands. She didn't know if he'd remember her after this, or if he even cared about her humble pie. But something inside her had shifted. For the first time, she felt seen. And as the judges gathered around the long table, she whispered to herself, "Maybe luck's already found me." The judges' table gleamed in the autumn sunlight. Silver forks lined up in perfect order, fine porcelain plates waiting to be filled. The air buzzed with nervous excitement as the mayor called for the contest to begin. Every baker stood behind their pie, some smiling with confidence, others whispering prayers. Mary Ellen stood at the very end of the long table, quiet, unnoticed. Her pie sat in front of her, golden and fragrant, a swirl of cinnamon sugar rising from the crust like a ribbon of warmth. Her hands trembled as she smoothed her apron. She could feel her heart pounding against her ribs, but she forced herself to breathe. "You've baked this 100 times," she told herself. "For Ma, for Pa, this one's just the same. Only the stakes are bigger." The mayor raised his voice. "Let the tasting begin." The judges stepped forward, 3 of them. Mrs. Carter, owner of the town's bakery, Reverend Hale, who everyone knew had a sweet tooth, and finally, Samuel Hart, the rancher who could buy every pie in town but rarely touched dessert. One by one, the judges sampled the entries. They murmured politely over cherry tarts, nodded at lemon meringues, and smiled at pecan pies. Each bite brought polite praise, but no spark. The crowd clapped for every contestant, yet something felt missing, until they reached the last pie on the table. Mary Ellen's. She stepped forward, voice trembling slightly. "It's apple, sir. My mother's recipe, grown from our own orchard." Samuel glanced at her, recognition flickering in his grey eyes. "The same pie you nearly dropped earlier?" "Yes, sir," she said softly, "though I hope it tastes better than it lands." A faint, surprised laugh rippled through the crowd. Even Samuel's mouth curved, just a little. Then he took up the knife and cut into the crust. The fork slid easily through the flaky layers, steam rising as the sweet filling revealed its tender apples bathed in golden syrup. He lifted a small bite to his lips. For a long moment, he said nothing. His eyes closed, the noise of the crowd fading into silence. When he opened them again, something unspoken shimmered there, a softness, a memory, a warmth he hadn't felt in years. Mrs. Carter leaned forward, tasting her share. "Mercy," she whispered, "that crust melts in your mouth." Reverend Hale nodded eagerly. "That's the taste of home, that is." But it was Samuel's quiet voice that carried across the crowd. "It's honest." The word hung in the air, simple, but powerful. Then he looked directly at Mary Ellen. "And it's perfect." Applause erupted from the townsfolk. Mary Ellen's eyes widened in disbelief, her breath catching as tears welled up. She pressed a flour-dusted hand to her chest, unable to speak. Her father's face flashed in her mind, his pride, his faith in her. The mayor clapped his hands. "Well, folks, it seems we've found our winner." The townspeople cheered, and a few even called her name, but Mary Ellen barely heard them. She looked up just as Samuel stepped closer, his voice low enough for only her to hear. "You bake from the heart," he said. "That's rare." "Thank you, Mr. Hart," she managed, her cheeks warm. "It's all I know how to do." He studied her for a moment longer, something unguarded flickering in his expression, before he nodded to the mayor and turned away. The celebration that followed was a blur of congratulations, laughter, and handshakes. But as the sun began to set and the golden light washed over the festival, Mary Ellen stood quietly to the side, holding her blue ribbon. Her dream had come true. Yet what lingered most wasn't the victory nor the money, but the look in Samuel Hart's eyes when he tasted her pie. It wasn't just approval. It was recognition. A spark of something neither of them fully understood yet. Something that would soon grow into a fire neither could ignore. That evening, as she walked home with the ribbon tied carefully around her wrist, the breeze carried the scent of apples through the air. For the first time in a long while, Mary Ellen smiled without forcing it. She didn't know it yet, but her life, and Samuel's, had just changed forever. Would you like me to continue with part 6? The offer, 600 words, next. The festival ended with laughter echoing down the dusty streets of Willow Creek. Lanterns swung in the cool evening breeze, and the smell of roasted apples and hay lingered long after the booths had emptied. Mary Ellen walked home under a sky strewn with stars, her prize money tucked safely in her pocket and her blue ribbon tied around her wrist. Every step felt lighter, as if the earth itself had finally loosened the weight on her shoulders. When she reached the farmhouse, her father was waiting on the porch, his old quilt around his shoulders. "Well?" he asked, voice rough with anticipation. Mary Ellen couldn't hold back her grin. "We won, Pa. The judges loved it, even Mr. Hart himself." Her father's eyes filled with tears. "I told you, Mary girl. Your ma's recipe could touch any heart, rich or poor." They sat together on the steps, watching the moon rise over the tired orchard. For that moment, the world felt safe again, full of promise and peace. But the next morning, everything changed. A knock rattled the front door just as Mary Ellen finished washing the breakfast dishes. She wiped her hands on her apron and opened it to find a man in a crisp vest and leather gloves standing there, Mr. Samuel Hart himself. For a moment she could only stare. He looked different here, framed by her humble doorway instead of his grand ranch. The sunlight caught the silver threads in his hair, softening his usually stern features. "Miss Miller," he said, removing his hat politely. "Forgive the intrusion. May I have a word?" "Of course, sir," she said quickly, stepping aside. Her father, sitting nearby, nodded in silent awe. Samuel's gaze swept the modest room, the patched curtains, the cracked floorboards, the faint smell of apples still lingering in the air. He turned back to Mary Ellen. "I came to deliver this personally," he said, holding out a folded letter sealed with red wax. She took it with trembling fingers and opened it. Inside, the words blurred together. Official invitation. Position at the Hart Ranch kitchen, effective immediately. Her breath caught. "You mean, you want me to work for you?" Samuel's mouth curved into the faintest smile. "If you're willing. I've tasted a great many pies in my life, Miss Miller, but yours was something different. I could use someone with that kind of heart in my kitchen, and perhaps on my ranch." Her father spoke before she could. "That's a fine offer, sir. My Mary's worked hard all her life. She deserves a fair chance." Samuel inclined his head respectfully. She'll have one. Room, board and wages, fair and honest. The position is hers if she accepts. Mary Ellen's hands twisted around the letter. It was everything she'd dreamed of. Security, respect, a future beyond their little farm. Yet looking at her father's pale face, she hesitated. "Pa, I can't just leave you here alone." He smiled faintly. "You can't stay forever, Mary girl. I'll be just fine. You go show them what a miller can do." Tears stung her eyes, but she nodded. "All right, Pa. I'll go." Samuel watched her closely, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. "You'll start Monday morning. I'll have my carriage sent for you." She curtsied slightly, her voice soft. "Thank you, Mr. Hart." He replaced his hat and paused at the door. "One more thing," he said, glancing toward the pie cooling on the counter. "I'd like to buy that one, if you don't mind." Mary Ellen blinked. "Sir, it's just a leftover." He interrupted gently. "Then it's a reminder of something worth keeping." She smiled shyly and handed it to him, wrapped in linen. "Then it's yours." He nodded once, then turned and rode away down the dusty road, the morning light glinting off his saddle. Mary Ellen stood in the doorway, long after he disappeared from sight, the letter pressed to her chest. The wind lifted her hair and carried the faint scent of apples into the fields. She had no idea what waited for her at the Hart Ranch, but she knew this much: her life was no longer just her own. The Hart Ranch kitchen was nothing like Mary Ellen had ever seen before. It was a grand, bustling place. Polished copper pots hung in neat rows, the scent of roasted meats and herbs filled the air, and the sound of chopping knives and boiling broth echoed through the high-beamed ceiling. Servants hurried back and forth like clockwork, each one careful not to slow under the watchful eyes of Mrs. Yates, the housekeeper. When Mary Ellen first stepped inside, clutching her small carpet bag, everything in her seemed to tighten. She was used to her tiny farmhouse kitchen, to cracked plates and a wood stove that groaned with age. Not this shining world of order and wealth. Her plain calico dress looked pitiful beside the crisp uniforms of the other maids. Mrs. Yates, a stern but fair woman, eyed her up and down. "You're the festival girl," she said, her tone measured. "Yes, ma'am," Mary Ellen replied, trying to sound braver than she felt. The housekeeper's expression softened. "Well, your pie turned even Mr. Hart's head, and that's a miracle if I ever saw one. We'll start you in the bakery then. Let's see if your hands work as well as they did at the fair." Mary Ellen nodded quickly and rolled up her sleeves. The other cooks watched her with polite curiosity, whispering among themselves. "That's the poor girl from the farm," one of them murmured. "The one who made the boss smile." She ignored the whispers and got to work. She peeled apples with practiced precision, mixed dough until it was soft and pliant, and sprinkled cinnamon with a gentle touch. Hours passed like minutes. By evening, the kitchen was filled with the scent of her pies baking, rich, sweet, and comforting. When Mrs. Yates brought one up to the main dining room, Samuel Hart happened to be reviewing ranch accounts by the fire. He looked up as the aroma reached him. "What's that?" he asked. "Your new baker's doing," Mrs. Yates replied. "Mary Ellen Miller." He hesitated, then set his papers aside. "Bring her here." Moments later, Mary Ellen stood nervously in the doorway of the great room, her apron dusted with flour, her hair escaping its braid. She curtsied slightly. "You wanted to see me, sir?" Samuel studied her, the flicker of the fire dancing in his grey eyes. "You've been here one day, and already the staff's singing your praises." She blushed. "I only baked what I know, sir. My ma taught me." He gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit." Her eyes widened. "Oh, I couldn't possibly—" "That's an order, Miss Miller." She sat gingerly at the edge of the seat. The rancher cut 2 slices of pie and placed one before her. "Eat," he said simply. They ate in silence for a moment. The pie was still warm, its flavors deep and full. Samuel set his fork down first. "You've done more than bake, you know," he said quietly. "You've brought something into this house it hasn't had in years." Mary Ellen looked up, startled. "And what's that, sir?" His gaze lingered on the fire. "Comfort. Home." The room fell still, the air heavy with something unspoken. She saw, for the first time, the loneliness behind his composed expression. The man who carried grief like a second skin. "I only did what I love," she said softly. "Maybe that's what your home needed." He looked at her then, truly looked at her. Not as a servant, not as a poor girl, but as someone who'd touched something inside him he thought was gone forever. After she left the room, he sat for a long time staring into the flames, the taste of cinnamon lingering on his tongue. Downstairs, Mary Ellen wiped down the counters, her heart fluttering for reasons she didn't dare name. From that day forward, Samuel Hart found more reasons to visit the kitchen, sometimes to check on the meals, sometimes to ask about a new recipe, and sometimes for no reason at all. And each time their eyes met over the warmth of an oven or a cooling pie, the quiet bond between them grew, slow and steady, like dough rising in the dark. By late autumn, the Hart Ranch had changed in small but noticeable ways. The workers smiled more often. The kitchen rang with laughter instead of orders. The smell of fresh pies drifted through the halls almost daily, and even the stern housekeeper, Mrs. Yates, began humming as she polished the silver. The reason for this quiet warmth was no secret. Mary Ellen Miller. Her kindness and gentle humor softened even the hardest tempers. She treated every servant as an equal, offered slices of pie to the stable boys, and stitched mittens for the younger maids. And as for Samuel Hart, he found excuses to linger near the kitchen far more often than before. At first he told himself it was just business, that he admired her discipline, her work ethic. But as days turned into weeks, he caught himself seeking her company, listening for her laughter, and noticing the way her hair curled near her neck when she bent over the stove. He had never meant to care. Yet somehow, the girl with flour on her hands had stolen into the empty chambers of his heart. But not everyone on the ranch shared his quiet joy. One crisp morning, a fine carriage rolled up the long drive, its wheels crunching over frost. From it stepped a tall woman draped in velvet and pride, Clara Whitfield, Samuel's late wife's cousin. She had once been a fixture at the ranch, especially after Samuel's loss, offering condolences that had long since turned into ambition. "Mr. Hart," she greeted, sweeping into the parlor without waiting to be invited. "You look well. The ranch seems different." "Productive," Samuel corrected, standing by the window. "We've had a good season." Clara's eyes narrowed slightly as she glanced around the room. "And I hear rumors about a new cook," she said lightly. Farm girl, isn't she?" Samuel's tone cooled. "Miss Miller is in charge of the kitchen. She's brought skill and order to this household." Clara's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Order, I'm sure. Though it's rather strange, isn't it? A man of your standing spending so much time among the servants." He turned sharply, his grey eyes hard. "You forget yourself, Clara." She held up her hands in mock surrender. "Oh, I mean no harm. I only worry for your reputation." But her mind was already churning. She had spent years imagining herself as Mrs. Hart, mistress of this grand estate. She would not let a poor farm girl threaten that dream. By evening, Clara had made her way to the kitchen under the guise of meeting the new staff. The warmth of the room struck her, golden light, the scent of apples and spice, and Mary Ellen standing at the counter with her sleeves rolled up, humming softly as she worked. "So," Clara said sweetly, stepping closer, "you're the famous Miss Miller." Mary Ellen turned, smiling politely. "Yes, ma'am. Can I offer you a slice of pie?" Clara's gaze flicked over her simple dress, her unpolished hands. "You're very quaint," she murmured. "Tell me, do you plan to bake forever? Or do you have larger ambitions?" Mary Ellen blinked, uncertain. "I just do what I love, ma'am." Clara's lips curved. How charming. Then, lowering her voice, she added, just be careful. The higher you rise, the harder the fall. Men like Mr. Hart don't marry girls like you. Mary Ellen froze. The words cut sharper than any knife. But before she could respond, Clara swept out, leaving the faint scent of lavender and malice behind. That night, something terrible happened. A batch of Mary Ellen pies, meant for the Sunday church dinner, burned beyond saving. The oven door had been tampered with. The other cooks whispered, and by morning, rumors spread like wildfire. The new girl ruined the meal. She's careless. She's not fit for the Hart kitchen. Samuel heard the gossip before breakfast. His jaw tightened. When he entered the kitchen, Mary Ellen stood beside the ruined pies, her eyes red from sleeplessness. I swear, sir, I checked everything twice, she said, voice trembling. It wasn't. He hesitated, torn between trust and doubt. Enough, he said finally, his voice low. Take the day to collect yourself. As she left the room, she caught sight of Clara standing in the doorway, smiling ever so slightly. That night, as a cold rain began to fall, Mary Ellen packed her small bag in silence. Her father's button rested in her pocket, heavy as a stone. She had baked with love. She had worked with honesty. But none of it had been enough. And somewhere upstairs, Samuel Hart stared out into the storm, unaware that the woman who had brought life back into his home was already walking away. The next morning dawned grey and heavy with mist. The Hart ranch, usually alive with the sounds of horses and laughter, felt strangely still. Word had spread that Mary Ellen Miller had left in the night, quietly, without a word to anyone. Samuel Hart hadn't slept. He had sat up long after midnight, staring into the cold ashes of the fireplace, the echo of her voice still clinging to the air. He told himself she would return once her pride cooled. Yet something deep in his chest, that same instinct that had guided him through storms and droughts, told him he had made a mistake. Mrs. Yates entered the study just after sunrise, her face tight with worry. Sir, she said, setting down a folded handkerchief, we found this in the kitchen. It's hers. He picked it up. Embroidered into one corner were the initials M.E.M., sewn in crooked but loving stitches. It was the kind of detail only a woman with a good heart would bother with. She's gone, Mrs. Yates added softly. Took the back road toward town before dawn. Samuel rose abruptly. Saddle my horse, but sir. Now. The ride into town was long and cold, the road muddy from the night's rain. Every passing mile brought a deeper ache. His mind replayed their last conversation, her trembling voice, the way he had silenced her too quickly. He had doubted her. After everything she had given, her time, her care, her warmth, he had let suspicion taint what was pure. By the time he reached the train station, the 9 o'clock coach was already preparing to depart. And there, near the platform, stood Mary Ellen. Her small figure was hunched beneath a worn shawl, her carpet bag at her side. The morning light caught the tear tracks on her cheeks. Samuel swung down from his horse, mud splattering his boots, and strode toward her. Mary Ellen! She turned, startled, and her eyes widened. Mr. Hart? Don't go, he said, breathless. Not like this. She shook her head, voice breaking. I can't stay where I'm not wanted. They said I ruined the meal, that I lied. You believed them. He flinched as if struck. I was a fool. Sir, no, he interrupted, his voice rough. You need to hear this. I let pride and fear blind me. I've lived my life protecting this ranch, my name, everything but my own heart. And when you came along, you changed this place, Mary Ellen. You changed me. The station went quiet around them. Even the wind seemed to still. She blinked back tears. You don't have to say that out of guilt. This isn't guilt, he said, stepping closer. This is truth. I know now it wasn't your fault. Mrs. Yates found the oven latch. It was loosened on purpose, and I know who did it. His jaw tightened. "Clara's gone. I sent her away this morning." Mary Ellen gasped softly. "You believed me?" "I always should have." He reached into his coat and pulled out something small, her embroidered handkerchief. "You left this behind." Her breath hitched. "I didn't mean to." He smiled faintly. "I don't think you were meant to leave anything behind, least of all your heart." For a moment, neither spoke. The whistle of the train pierced the silence, a reminder that time was running thin. Then, as the steam curled around them, Samuel took her hands, rough from work, warm despite the cold. "Mary Ellen Miller," he said quietly, "come back to Hart Ranch, not as a servant, as its mistress." Her eyes filled with tears. "You can't mean—" "I do," he said. "You baked one pie and somehow managed to feed the starving man I'd become. If you'll have me, I'll spend the rest of my life proving I'm worthy of that gift." The conductor called the final boarding. Mary Ellen looked from the train to the man before her, the man who had once seemed so far above her world and now stood bare-hearted in front of her. Slowly, she smiled through her tears. "Well then," she whispered, "I reckon I'll unpack my bag." Samuel exhaled a shaky laugh, relief softening every line in his face. He lifted her carpetbag easily and took her hand as they walked toward his horse. As they rode back through the mist, the first hints of sunlight broke through the clouds, warm, golden, and new. Winter came early to the valley that year, brushing the fields with frost and turning the Hart Ranch into a wonder of white and silver. But inside the great house, warmth spilled from every window. Laughter echoed through the halls. The scent of apples, cinnamon, and vanilla floated through the air once more, just as it had the first day Mary Ellen arrived. It was the day of the wedding. The townsfolk gathered early, their wagons filling the lane that led up to the ranch. No one wanted to miss the union that had become the talk of 3 counties, the rich rancher and the poor farm girl whose pie had stolen his heart. Some whispered that it was a fairy tale come true. Others said it was proof that kindness and hard work could rise higher than any fortune. In the kitchen, Mary Ellen stood before the mirror, her hands trembling just slightly. Her dress was simple, cream muslin trimmed with lace borrowed from Mrs. Yates. Her hair, usually braided for work, fell in soft curls pinned with tiny white blossoms. She hardly recognized herself. Mrs. Yates fussed around her, tears in her eyes. "You'll do fine, my girl," she said, fastening a small gold brooch at Mary Ellen's collar. "You've earned every bit of this happiness." Mary Ellen smiled shyly. "I never thought I'd see a day like this." "Oh, you earned it with more than pie," the older woman chuckled. "You baked love into this house until even the walls began to smile again." Outside, the guests took their seats beneath a wide oak tree, its bare branches strung with ribbons and lanterns. The sun broke through the winter clouds, spilling golden light across the snow. At the end of the aisle stood Samuel Hart, tall and steady, his gray eyes soft with wonder. When he saw her step from the house, he drew in a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. The music began. A single fiddle, played by one of the ranch hands, and Mary Ellen walked slowly toward him. Each step was light, yet it felt like walking through a dream. When she reached him, Samuel took her hand in both of his voice low and rough with emotion. "I used to think I'd lost my heart forever," he said, so softly that only she could hear. "But you came along and showed me it had only been waiting." Her smile trembled, tears glistening. "And I used to think love was something meant for other people, until you made me feel seen." The preacher spoke the vows, his voice rising above the winter wind, and when the moment came, Samuel lifted her veil. Their kiss was gentle, full of the kind of promise that needs no words. The crowd cheered, hats flying into the air, the sound of applause mixing with laughter and fiddle music. That evening, the great hall was filled with light and song. The long tables were covered with food from the ranch and the town, But at the center sat a single pie, golden brown, sugar-crusted, and still warm. Mary Ellen placed it before her husband, smiling. "It's the same recipe," she said softly. He took a bite, closed his eyes, and laughed quietly. "It tastes like home." They shared it among the guests, ranch hands, maids, and townsfolk alike. No one left out, no one too grand to eat at the same table. It was not just a wedding feast. It was a celebration of everything they'd both fought for: honesty, forgiveness, and the magic that could rise from the simplest act of love. Later that night, when the guests were gone and the lanterns flickered low, Samuel and Mary Ellen stood together by the fire. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and steady. He slipped his arm around her waist. "You know," he murmured, "I don't reckon I'd have noticed you if it weren't for that pie." She laughed, resting her head against his shoulder. "Then I suppose I'll keep baking, just to make sure you never forget." He kissed her forehead. "Not a chance in the world." And there, in the heart of winter, a farm girl and a rancher began the rest of their story. One warm pie, one steady love, and one forever home at a time.